Hi besties and welcome back to my trash channel. Don't ask questions. I'm back now with the final part of Date Me, which I hope you will all enjoy. I'll explain at the end of the video anything else I have planned for my next videos, but for right now, enjoy the video. Atsumu bit his lip as he hobbled into his apartment, 2 bags in hand that were filled to the brim with the groceries that he promised he'd bring home hours ago. He was drained, emotionally and physically. He was just all too ready to hop into his bed and sleep the night away. He'd sleep the whole of the next day away too if he had the option for that. He groaned as his body practically fell through the front door, along with his bags that were now resting impatiently on the ground, the contents spewing out of the open lid of the bags. Atsumu let out a collection of deep breaths, his body now tired from the struggle that he had to enforce whilst hiking himself and his stuffed bags up the dorm's flight of stairs. Achoo! Sakuatsu called from across the dorm. He must have heard him come in. It wasn't exactly a subtle entry. Hey. Kyumi managed to squeeze out, his cheeks tinted with a light rouge, though his tone almost immediately changed at the sight of the blonde's face. He was more panicked than prior. Achoo! You okay? He rushed over to him like a doctor treating their sick patient. Atsumu didn't know what else to say or do other than look to the ground as Sakuatsu's worried hand cupped the side of his cold cheek. What happened? Geez, Omi, am I that ugly? Atsumu teased, his voice hoarse and in a sarcastic tone. Sakuatsu pulled himself closer in reply, nesting their foreheads inches apart and tracing a hand down the blonde's waist. Achoo, talk to me. What happened? He questioned a second time. Nothing happened, Omi, you got nothing to worry about. I clearly do. You were gone for hours and you looked like shit. Didn't think I looked that bad. Atsumu joked through a forced laugh, settling even more worry in Kyumi's gut. Sakuatsu wasn't sure what else to ask. He clearly wasn't getting a reply to his current question. Achoo. Atsumu pulled himself away from Sakuatsu. He bent down to pick his bags up from the floor before he directed a half-assed attempt of a smile Kyumi's way. He was just too tired. Smiling seemed too much of a struggle. I better go put this in the kitchen. I got some stuff that has to be refrigerated. Let me help. Sakuatsu grabbed one of the bag handles. His and Atsumu's skin made contact for a split moment, surprising the blonde, who sprung his hand away the moment he noticed Sakuatsu had the proper grip on the bag. Omi, it's fine. I'm fine. I can put everything away myself. Just go back to doing whatever you were doing. Sakuatsu sighed, offering his hand out to the second bag still in Atsumu's hand. Come on, hand me the bag. Instead of listening to Sakuatsu's request, Atsumu just looked to the ground. He was too tired to fight back or deal with anything right now. His hand clenched around the bag as he slowly started to forward the bag to Sakuatsu. His eyes were still focused on the ground, welling up with tears out of nowhere. Atsumu didn't even know why he was crying this time. Atsumu tried his best to keep his composure, but it wasn't long before his breath hitched. His hand released around the bag as it dropped to the floor and he was rushing to his bedroom with his saddened neck ducked lowly. Achoo. Sakuatsu, as expected, followed after him, stopping him from walking further by placing a hand on the blonde's shoulder. Achoo. Talk to me. It's getting late, don't you think? We both have class in the morning. We should probably go to sleep. I can't leave you alone when you're feeling like this. Omi, I'm fine. Atsumu persisted despite the forced tone of his sentence. I'm just tired. There's nothing to worry about. K. Atsumu. Atsumu's lips curled up at the edges. This one wasn't forced. Knowing his next actions filled him with some sort of joy within his overall dull mood. He looped his arms around Kyumi's shoulders and hugged him tightly for a moment. The latter explicitly embraced him back, combing his fingers through Atsumu's golden hair. It wasn't until Atsumu began to pull back did he kiss the dark-haired male on the cheek. Night, Omi, he whispered as he walked into his bedroom, closing the door before Sakuatsu even had a chance to reply. Sakuatsu was simply stunned, his cheeks a gorgeous red and a soft smile on his lips. Night, Achoo, he muttered as his eyebrows hunched in. He was happy the blonde kissed him, but of course he was still worried about him. He wanted to simply bust down the door and smother Atsumu in his love and affection until he felt at least slightly better, but Atsumu clearly wanted his space right now, and Sakuatsu was going to respect that. Omi, let's go grab a coffee before my next class. Atsumu leaned over the couch where Sakuatsu was sitting. He'd fall over the top of it if he wasn't careful with how much he was hanging over the edge. You have a class in a bit? MHM. Atsumu hummed in confirmation. The blonde smile was bright and full of joy. Sakuatsu was sure he felt his heart explode with adoration on the spot, his cheeks preaching a ruby red. He was glad Atsumu was feeling far better than the night prior. Did your schedule change or something? You don't usually have classes until the evening today. Well, Omi knows my schedule HAA. Must say I'm honored. He tried his best to tease despite his cheeks obviously glowing a flustered red. But seriously, did your schedule change? I didn't think you had class at this time. No, I usually do. Yet Atsumu didn't seem so confident in his words. But anyways, that's beside the point. You wanna go get coffee or not? When does your class start? HNNN. Around 1ish. 1ish? Kyumi questioned, vocalizing his suspicions on Atsumu's supposed class. It's at 1 then. You don't have to go all detective mode on me, you know. I wasn't. You just sounded overly suspicious. You don't usually have a class at this time. Well, I do, and always have. The blonde huffed despite yet again being unconvinced by his own words. He knew full well Sakuatsu wasn't convinced either. Only a simple glaze at the dark-haired male's deadpanned expression could tell you that much. Alright, I get it. You have class at 1ish. This time Atsumu scoffed instead of huffing. He retracted his lean on the edge of the couch and gave Sakuatsu a pat on the shoulder as he made way towards the exit of the living room. He decided it was best to leave before Sakuatsu decided to interrogate him further. Shut up and let's go. We haven't got all day. He shouted into the living room before he walked completely out. He didn't stay long enough to hear the choked laugh coming from Sakuatsu's throat as he too stood up. We're not going to stay out long, are we? Omi, we've already established that I have class soon. Of course we're not gonna be too long. Yeah, but you're also not very convincing. Sakuatsu huffed as he laced a hand around the blonde's shoulder, using him as something to lean on. He was trying to make his embarrassing want for Atsumu's touch and closure seem invisible, though he failed miserably. His cheeks and ears were clearly tinted into some shade of pink. The same could be said for Atsumu, who was leaning forwards to slide his shoes on and tilting his head away from Sakuatsu's view in hopes to hide his flustered face. Surprisingly, luck appeared to be on his side as Kyumi was miming the exact same action. They were both oddly pining for each other. Kyumi didn't think he could last a single day without Atsumu's bribing touch with how his feelings were directing him. What time is it anyways? HAA. You mean you agreed to go out with me before my next class and didn't even know the time? How is that my fault? I shouldn't be bothered about the time right now. You're the one with the class, not me. You should have checked to see if we had enough time. The comment was clearly sarcastic, but the way Atsumu said it was strangely amusing. Not my problem. Sakuatsu spoke through a low laugh that only deepened the shade of Atsumu's cheeks. The blonde simply stood there silently in awe as he stared intensely at the floorboards. He'd be lying if he said Kyumi's laugh wasn't currently echoing around in his mind. You should be glad that I trust your judgment and time management. Don't complain. He laughed a second time. Even Sakuatsu, an idiot who had only just recognized Atsumu's feelings towards him with the help of extra prods of clarification from the blonde's brother, could recognize the look of love on Atsumu's face. He could end up looking the same if he wasn't careful. His whole face was already increasing in pigmentation as the moments longed. Shut up, 𝗴𝘢𝘬𝘶. Took you long enough. Oh, be quiet. You spent the last few moments just staring at the floor. I think I have the right to say something. Atsumu's rouged cheeks puffed out. Just, 𝗴𝘢𝘬𝘶. Now. Hurry up. I wasn't zoned out for that long. You're overreacting. Atsumu grabbed hold of the door handle and swiftly tried his best to yank it downwards and escape the humid room they were both standing in. It seemed to be heating up by the moment. Do ya have your keys, idiot? Sakuatsu chuckled and dove his hand in his pocket. Dash. Atsumu felt like he was going insane with the amount of tension he could feel in his head as his tightly held pen scribbled words all over a single piece of paper. It was almost full by now, but he refused to stop brainstorming. He didn't know the time. He hadn't even bothered to look at his laptop for God knows how long. It was just there was a source of light, shining down to his paper so that he could actually make out the words written on it due to the darkness that took over his room as the night time took over the day. Atsumu groaned as he threw his body to the back of his chair, dramatically leaning his back against it and palming his hands to his forehead as he let out a disastrous sigh. No matter how many different ideas he thought of, none of them seemed to fit. A single eye focused back onto the paper, reading the lettering in the center for the 100th time. Confess. Hundreds of thin lines swarmed away from word, pointing towards different groups of writing. That font seemed to get smaller as the page filled fuller and fuller. He sighed. So many ideas, yet none of them seemed perfect. He couldn't see himself putting any of them into place. His cheeks glowed pink. Atsumu wasn't sure whether it was due to the amount of time he had spent brainstorming ideas and that he was getting stressed and bored, or whether the thought of confessing made him flustered to the point where it appeared on his features. His eyes flicked up to look at his laptop. He was surprised it hadn't turned off by now. He hadn't touched it in a while. Maybe his aggressive and urgent writing's what was stopping it from turning its screen to black. The shakes of his desk were what were probably keeping it awake. His eyes mindlessly stared at the words on his Word document, his essay that he had just finished writing, until a random and obtrusive idea fell into his mind. Immediately sitting straight up in his seat, Atsumu pulled his laptop towards himself, desperately scrolling to the bottom of the long list of filled pages of words until he finally reached the bottom. Kyumi always proofreads his essays. Blush overtook his cheeks. He smiled to himself almost too brightly. The idea wasn't perfect. None of the ideas he had written on the sheet of paper were perfect, but this was the one he was most comfortable with. This one would work. Hurriedly, Atsumu rushed into the kitchen, slamming his opened laptop down next to Sakuatsu, who was calmly and silently spoon-feeding himself a bowl of cereal before Atsumu came in to destroy his peace. Morning to you too. Kyumi snarked, dropping his spoon into his cereal bowl and leaving it there to float as he focused his attention to the frantic blonde storming around the kitchen before him. I haven't got time for your comments, Omi. He dropped a piece of bread in the toaster and pushed the lever down, sighing as he finally gave himself some time to relax. Where are you even going? You don't have class this morning, right? HAA. Of course I do. You don't usually. Sakuatsu squinted in Atsumu's direction, as if he was seeing through the lie the blonde was telling. I thought you memorized my schedule, Omi. You didn't do it very well, it seems. I must say I'm quite hurt. I thought you knew me better than this. I did memorize your schedule. Are you sure it didn't change? This is like the 8th class you've had that I didn't know about. I've always had these classes, dipshit. The toaster pinged behind Atsumu, who was quick to grasp the slice and stuff it in his mouth. He didn't even bother to butter it. You know, you're really shit at waking yourself up. Tell me all your classes in future. I'll wake you up myself. NNN. You don't need to do that. I'm not late yet, am I? I've still got time to get to my class. Atsumu mumbled as he continued to stuff his toast into his mouth. Barely. Also, close your mouth. That's disgusting. Whatever, Omi. Quickly, he shoved the last of his toast into his mouth and swallowed it as fast as he could before he reached out to grasp his backpack he had thrown on the countertop earlier. Call me if you need me, Omi. Trust me, I won't. Laughing, Atsumu made his way out of the kitchen, leaving his laptop to sit beside Sakuatsu, who immediately noticed the blonde's forgetfulness. He instantly called for him. Idiot, you forgot your laptop. It took a few seconds for the blonde to reply. He was busy putting his shoes on by the door and trying to contain the flusteredness taking over his whole body. He didn't even want to think about saying a single word, but Sakuatsu would probably get worried if he stayed silent. Yomi. He felt stupid straight after. He knew he would sound like a complete idiot if he opened his mouth. He was right. His voice couldn't help but stutter over his words. Don't make me chase after you. You need your laptop for your class. It's too late now. See ya. Kyumi stood up from his seat, just in time to hear the door slam close. He sighed as he slowly slid himself back down to his seat. Maybe he would have to chase after him after all. The last thing he needed was to hear Atsumu whining about how much harder taking notes was. Atsumu would do something stupid and of course Kyumi also had to pay for it. Groaning a second time, he looked down to his bowl of cereal before deciding that he didn't want to eat it anymore and had completely lost his appetite. For all Sakuatsu knew, Atsumu could quite probably not even have a class. He'd been acting strange recently, getting all nervous before he made up an excuse as to why he had to leave the dorm. Usually an important class that Kyumi didn't even know existed beforehand. That could probably explain why Atsumu didn't need his laptop. If he didn't have a class, why would he need it? He sighed. This was taking more thinking than what it was probably worth. He could always give the blonde his laptop back once they met up at their joint class later. If Atsumu genuinely was just making up excuses to avoid Sakuatsu, then there was no exact reason as to why he should chase after him. He frowned. That idea didn't exactly make him feel good. He didn't want Atsumu to ignore him or avoid him. In fact, that was probably the last thing he would ever want the blonde to do. But Atsumu had his reasonings. Everything was slowly starting to fit in place in Kyumi's mind. His reasoning. His cheeks were already a shade of pink just from the self-admittance in his head that he in fact didn't like the blonde ignoring him. Now they were glowing more pigmented as his mind was drawn back to his phone call with Osamu. He likes me. The phrase simply felt amazing to verbalize. He likes me. He spoke again, this time in a more nervous tone. Yeah, Atsumu was avoiding him. He made that painfully obvious. But at least Kyumi knew the reason, and the reason was something that made his stomach feel fuzzy and warm. Strange yet pleasing. His face felt embarrassed yet in complete bliss. His phone buzzed, immediately taking Kyumi from his daze as his shocked eyes darted towards it. He hadn't even noticed that he was staring longingly into the face of Atsumu's laptop for the past few minutes. Lost in thought, he swiftly read the notification on his phone screen. From Atsumu, of course. What does he want now? His tone was quite sharp despite the opposing look on his face. He looked like a schoolgirl who had just asked out their first crush. An awkward and unexpected wide grin lifted his bulging cheeks. I forgot to mention. Could you proofread my essay for me? He sighed and clicked on the message, which immediately dropped down. The rest of Atsumu's messages followed suit. It's due soon. And I know you don't have any classes this morning, Nomi. Proofread my essay. K. Sakuatsu scoffed. The question was more of an order if anything. He didn't really have a choice. He'd get Atsumu whining at him later if he refused to read it. Ducking his head lowly, Kyumi walked into the classroom. His hair disguised most of his face, but he was still able to see through the strands. His head turned up for a moment, his black curtains of hair no longer being able to mask the sight of Sakuatsu's rosy cheeks. He couldn't exactly hold it back either. How could he after what he had just read? It seemed he had arrived in class early. The professor hadn't arrived yet, and many of the seats were still vacant. But Atsumu's wasn't. The blonde sat in his usual seat, fidgeting with the pens and pencils he had brought to class, almost like he was waiting on something that would decide his fate. And that something was Kyumi. The dark-haired male couldn't even look the blonde's way without ducking his head a second time, his face reddening further. There was no telling of what the future held. For the first time, Kyumi actually paid his own seat some attention. His eyebrows furrowed for a moment. A certain ginger was sitting in his seat, a smug smirk planted on his face as he stared strongly back Kyumi's way. Kyumi was confused to say the least. That was until Shoyo dramatically lifted his arm in the air before pointing a finger directly towards Atsumu's chair, with the equivalent dramatic intention. Sakuatsu wasn't stupid. He immediately got Hinata's intentions. Though it did add to the growing amount of questions he had before that seemed to increase by the minute. Was Hinata in on Atsumu's idea too? He gulped. Shoyo was obviously directing Kyumi to occupy the seat beside Atsumu. And that was exactly what he did, though he wouldn't say he did it with full confidence. His bag nervously was dropped on the desk. He made sure that both his own and Atsumu's laptop were carefully placed down on the desk. He exhaled anxiously. Atsumu hadn't tried to look Kyumi's way once, but even from the corner of Sakuatsu's eye, he could tell the blonde was just as, maybe even more nervous than he was, but that would make sense. Kyumi unpacked his bag and slid Atsumu's laptop closer to him. His mouth opened to say something, but a single moment of hesitation caused him to stay silent. Without a single word, Atsumu lifted his laptop lid, expecting to see his login screen. Yet instead a new Word document appeared on his screen. The lettering the essay was good. I corrected a few grammatical errors, covered the page in bold. Atsumu gulped audibly. His head finally tilted in Kiyumi's direction. Of course Sakuatsu didn't hesitate to take the chance to stare into the blonde's eyes, which seemed to be in shock, but Kiyumi could have sworn he saw hearts in his eyes. Sakuatsu cracked a timid smile. Atsumu just swiftly turned away and looked down to disguise his growing red cheeks. Thank you. Atsumu played with his hands in his lap. Anytime. 3 hours earlier. Kiyumi's bored eyes scanned the face of Atsumu's laptop screen. An occasional yawn was released from his mouth. The essay simply didn't have many things to correct, and it wasn't like it was about an interesting topic either. He only had a few grammatical errors to correct. It wasn't much, but he supposed it could add to Atsumu receiving a better grade. He didn't even know how long he had been reading. It could have been hours for all he knew, but he eventually reached the bottom. He sighed. At least that was something he could cross off his list. Well, Atsumu's list. He squinted at the page he was on. Page 46. Page 46 of 47 inches. He wasn't that bothered about it. Atsumu probably had just accidentally extended his document to another page. His cursor scrolled down to the 47th page, expecting to have to delete something, yet instead he was met with quite the opposite. Haikyuu-kun. Red heart. Was the first thing Sakuatsu read. His interest immediately peaked as he shuffled to the edge of the chair. It was probably a thank you note. Atsumu had written one at the end of one of his essays once before to thank Sakuatsu for proofreading it. You're probably wondering why I'm writing you a note now. I know you're probably going to read this. I know you'll get rid of the extra pages I accidentally make somehow. And no, this isn't a thank you note. This is something completely different. Well, thank you anyways for proofreading my essay anyways. I already tried to do it myself earlier, but you know how I can get with grammar sometimes. You're so much better at noticing mistakes like that than me. But anyways, this isn't about my essay. I know I just made you read the whole darn thing to get to this note, but it's nothing related. Kiyumi gulped as he read on, taking a strong sip from his mug of coffee that he had made earlier. Getting around halfway through the essay tired him out. I just didn't even know how to tell you this, and trust me, I brainstormed many different ways. If you just looked at the notepad on my desk you would see that, but don't do that. There's no need. I'll tell you here. Get on with it then. His voice felt hesitant and nervous, like he knew what was about to be said, and expectantly, his cheeks glowed a rosy shade. I've felt like this for a while. I don't exactly know when or why. I guess the whole fake dating thing triggered something in me. You just make me feel so happy only when I'm with you and like we're having fun. And you make me happy with how you care about me and look after me when I'm sad. Like yeah, half the time you have a dirty look on your face and you look like you could shove 10 knives down my throat at any moment, but I know at heart that you really care about me. And like that you make me happy Omi. But I guess you could also say that because you make me so happy, it also makes me sad when I can't be around you or when I actually come out of my days and realize that we were never really dating and half of your actions were probably due to the fact that you wanted to make us seem as realistic as you could. I guess I could also say I admire that about you too. You tried so hard to do something that would bring no benefits to you. And that's because you care about me. And I care about you too. That's somewhat of why I'm telling you all this now. I know you probably aren't enjoying me ignoring you, and I'm really sorry about that. I just thought that was the only way. But I guess after this, I'm hoping I won't have to ignore you anymore Omi-kun. I'm sorry I'm saying this through a stupid note at the end of an essay and not to your face. It's just that even looking at your face normally makes me flustered. I don't wanna imagine what I'd get like if I even tried to say this all to your face. I'd probably end up saying something dumb and out of context or accidentally just get straight to the point. Speaking of the point, I probably should just say it now. I guess I've been keeping you waiting quite a while now. Just, if you don't like what you're about to see, don't give me the cold shoulder, okay? I guess that's always been one of my worries. I want you to keep caring about me Omi, and I wanna care for you if you're ever upset. Just close the laptop lid. You will get what I'm saying when you finally see it. Here's me hoping you haven't already read it. I mean it's pretty hard to not see. Just make sure you save the document first. I don't want all your corrections to get lost or something. Just, thank you Omi-kun, for everything and I'll see you at our next class. Don't you worry, I'll be waiting anxiously. Kiyumi's whole face was red. He had to be an idiot if he didn't understand by now, but some confirmation is always nice. His fingers trembled as they moved the cursor to the large save button on the screen, which he immediately clicked and closed the laptop lid. His breath hitched. His eyes went wide. His whole face was a pigmented red. He read the writing on the paper taped to the back of the laptop at least 10 billion times. A stupid grin rose to his mouth as everything was now confirmed. This was real. Atsumu liked him. He read the text again and rested his blushing face into the palms of his hands. Holy fuck. If it wasn't obvious, Omi, I like ya. He liked him. That was a thought that replayed over and over again in his mind. He gulped and grinned. He was anxious yet now excited for the next lesson ahead. Never usually a good sign, but today, maybe it was. I like you too, idiot. That sentence was somehow equally satisfying to say. Dash. 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 So, Omi, was my essay good? Startled, Kiyumi looked up from his desk and into Atsumu's eyes for what was probably the first time in minutes. He knew what was coming, and he was unsure of how he was meant to feel about it all. Should he be excited? Nervous? Scared? Nothing like this had ever happened to him before. Yet only a few grammatical errors, but I corrected them all. Sakuatsu managed to force the words out of himself, all while the blonde was staring into his eyes far too confidently, which didn't help with the anxiety that was being forced on him. That's good. The small break in the blonde's voice was more than enough to completely break the long-held eye contact between the pair. Red rushed into every pore on Atsumu's face and his eyes went wide as he stared down to the cracks and pen marks on his desk. So you read all of it? Despite being embarrassed, Atsumu managed to squeeze out yet another sentence and Sakuatsu admired it. The blonde could even push forward in an awkward situation. Sakuatsu just imagined himself in Atsumu's shoes. He could never do this. He'd just wallow away in his bedroom and cry himself to sleep every night. Confessing would never even be an option. Yeah. Sakuatsu replied. Even if he couldn't do what Atsumu had the confidence to do now, he'd at least try to help the blonde go through with it. He now realized he wanted Atsumu, just as much as he wanted him, even if most of it was a subconscious knowing at first, which is why he nervously smiled into Atsumu's eyes until the blonde looked back at him again. Their faces were equally flustered by this point. Like, all of it? Atsumu already knew that answer. The look on Kiyumi's face told him that much. Plus the sheet of paper Atsumu had taped to the back of his laptop had been peeled off. And that wasn't from magic. All of it. So, what did you think of it? Sorry I'm late. Their professor bursted into the room, letting the door slam behind her as he practically flung her bag and laptop to her desk. She didn't waste any time plugging it in. I was just in a rush this morning. Sorry for keeping you guys waiting. She was late, per usual. She looked exhausted, at least from what Sakuatsu could see. Her hair and outfit was practically thrown together and her shoes were untied. Sakuatsu didn't even want to know what had kept her busy for so long. Nor did he know whether to be thankful for the intrusion or not. His feelings were mixed up. He didn't know what to think or feel, nor did he know what to do. Should he focus back on Atsumu or the lecture at hand? So many unanswered questions. Should they do this here? Or wait until after the lesson? He just stuck with the simple option, to wait, and see what was to come. Yet he didn't seem to wait long. Both males were practically going insane by the shared silence between them both, each awkwardly glancing in each other's direction anytime they built up the confidence. Sakuatsu couldn't wait any longer, not when his head was just about to burst open. Atsumu tried his best to distract himself with his hands in his lap, but this was a hard featuring considering Kiyumi was sitting next to him. He didn't know what he was thinking or feeling, and this thought alone brought his anxiety to a complete peak. He gulped as he slowly turned his head Kiyumi's way, only to see Sakuatsu's hand scribbling with a pencil on a post-it note. They were in class. Atsumu had seemed to have forgotten that detail. Of course Sakuatsu was taking notes. Atsumu should be too. At least he thought what Sakuatsu was doing was taking notes. Yet barely 5 seconds after his original glace, he was completely proven wrong. The blonde could only recall the feeling of a light tapping on his hand. His head was turned up until he was forced to look at Kayumi's face, which was completely smothered with a burning red shade that was mimed by Atsumu after only half a second. "Oh Omi," he whispered ever so quietly. He was sure that only Kayumi could hear his low voice. Sakusa's eyes sparkled before a small smile was forced to his lips. His fingers that were previously tapping on Atsumu's hand halted before they laced around the blondes, interlocking their hands in a tight hold. Atsumu wasn't sure where to look. Should he look at their hands or Sakusa's gorgeous face? If he could take a picture of it, he would have. The way he was looking at him made his stomach feel fuzzy and his throat feel dry. Kayumi rubbed Atsumu's hand with his thumb before he used his other hand to point to a post-it note Sakusa had incoherently stuck to Atsumu's laptop screen moments before, but the blonde didn't notice it. How could he when he had his and Sakusa's interlocked hands to stare at? With that, Atsumu read the words and symbols scribbled all over the small note. "I like you too Achu, Omi red heart." Atsumu didn't have any other words he would rather hear, or read. Atsumu stepped out of the room. He didn't know how he managed to leave before Sakusa. Kayumi was closer to the exit. Maybe the room was getting too heated to handle, meaning he had to leave before he'd dry out like a plum in the desert. Warm air circulated the large room, and Atsumu told himself that was why he was feeling so warm, to distract himself from the truth. That was most definitely not the actual reason. Sakusa stepped out shortly after. He had spent the extra time he had in the lecture room well, freaking out and cosplaying as a tomato whilst slowly packing his belongings away. Everyone in the class had already left by now, including Hinata. Atsumu's hands were clammy as he glimpsed nervously up into Kayumi's eyes whilst drawing a circle over and over again with his fingers in his palm. "You don't have any more classes today I don't know about, right?" Sakusa asked questioningly. Only God knew what excuse Atsumu would make to run away next. "I don't. Sakusa teased. "I guess it depends." Atsumu managed to reply in a joking tone despite the tense moment. "Depends on what?" Atsumu caught a glimpse of the building's glass front doors that were not unreasonably far away from where they stood. Clusters of droplets splattered all over its clear front. "Depends. Do ya have an extra class or something?" "I don't." Sakusa placed a hand softly on Atsumu's shoulder, which he slowly ran down his arm until he finally connected his fingers with the blonde's. "I guess I don't either then." He gripped onto Sakusa's hand tightly. He really didn't want Kayumi to let go of him as he stared into his eyes with hearts of adoration in his own. "What do you want to do then? You want to go home or something?" he asked as he grabbed Atsumu's second hand. Meanwhile Atsumu caught himself looking at the glass door again. It seemed he had other plans. He smiled softly until eventually he formed a smirk, gripping Sakusa's hand even tighter before he began to pull him as he started walking. "So you don't want to go home?" Sakusa decided to walk beside him. He didn't want to be dragged the whole way to wherever Atsumu was taking him. "Oh, where are we going?" "To the end of the corridor. Our dorm is the complete opposite way." "I know. Which is exactly why we're going this way." "Oh, so we're not going home?" Atsumu stopped just before the door. Raindrops hurled to the floor and expanded the growing lake-like puddles on the ground. Only a few students could be seen outside, each rushing to different buildings whilst covering their heads with anything they had on hand, such as their backpack or books. Only an odd few had umbrellas. "Geez, it's raining hard." Atsumu placed his hand flat on the glass and the cold condensation dampened his palm and fingers. "Way to state the obvious." Atsumu snarked. "I'm just saying. It hasn't rained like this in a while." Sakusa mirrored Atsumu's actions and placed his hand on the window, all while his other was still closely interlocked with the blonde's. "Do ya think it's cold?" "Of course it would be cold. It's been cold all week." "Well, maybe it's raining warm water or something." "Yes, and that's exactly why people are running to shelter. They just don't want to get wet. The rain's temperature doesn't matter, Omi." Atsumu smiled to himself. He thought for a moment before he slowly slid his hand down the glass and to the door handle, which was also slightly wet on the side facing the outdoors. "What do ya say, Omi? How about we test whether they're all overreacting?" "What? No, we'll get wet." "No shit. That's the whole point. And we still need to test the temperature of the water. It's for science, Omi. I stopped studying science in high school." "You want a medal?" Atsumu grinned before he pushed the door open, ignoring the weight that came out of Sakusa's mouth as he walked out, half dragging Kyumi along with him, who tried to keep himself warm and dry inside. As if on cue, the sound of thunder echoed across the campus. The blonde swore it even shook the building, which only added to his excitement. "Siomi, look how cool this all is." He raised his voice so that Sakusa could actually hear him over the sound of the droplets crashing against the concrete ground. "I will die the second I step out of this building. And you say I'm dramatic. Come on Omi, at least you will die in my arms." Sakusa sighed and looked down, disguising the small smile that had formed on the tips of his lips. Atsumu's beaming was too cute to ignore. "I guess you're the one who's cleaning up my guts then. Lucky me." Sakusa stepped out into the cold and was immediately met with his head already drenched in water. He didn't even want to imagine how cold Atsumu's head felt at that moment. He didn't want to allow himself to sympathize with the blonde either, especially after he was given little to no time to adjust to the cold before Atsumu was already dragging him deeper and deeper into the cold scene and further away from any shelter. It wasn't long before they were charging down some steps like idiots. Atsumu had decided he wanted to slide himself down the banister, yet he ordered Sakusa to hold his hand the whole time to help him keep his balance. "Ugh. My ass is wet now," was the only thing Atsumu could think about saying as soon as he reached the bottom. "I never would have guessed. It's cold. I guess you've got your answer for your science investigation. The rainwater is indeed very cold. Numbing actually. I can feel my head slowly dying as we speak." "Shut up Omi. This isn't about you and your cold head. This is about me and my freezing ass." "What? Do you want me to hold it for you?" "Yes." Atsumu responded almost too quickly, staring seriously into Sakusa's eyes until he eventually laughed and grabbed both of Kyumi's hands. "Absolutely not. I was only joking." Sakusa smiled back at him and took a step closer. He removed both of his hands from Atsumu's grip and instead used them to cup the blonde's face. One hand was used to sweep away the hair stuck to his forehead like glue due to the water trapped in it. "I know." He smiled. "I know you're cold. I'm fine." His eyes looked away from Sakusa's and instead they focused on the raven-haired male's chest as his head slowly ducked down. But Sakusa wasn't going to allow that as he lifted his head back up, practically forcing him to look his way. "At least your cheeks are warm." Atsumu huffed. "Don't tease me. How can I not?" This time Atsumu stepped closer to him, silently yet nervously lacing his arms around Kyumi's back. "Yours are warm too." "No, they're actually freezing off as we speak. They'll get frostbite eventually and fall off." "Cheeks can fall off?" "Yes, I think." "Does that mean your cute little nose is gonna fall off too? He's bright and red." "I guess so." Atsumu hummed softly and poked his finger on Kyumi's nose. That was until he flinched and quickly retracted it. "He really is cold." "Yes Atsumu, we're outside, in God knows what temperate weather, and with water drenching our ever poor." "Didn't know you majored in English. Such descriptive writing Omi." "That was literally speech. You used a metaphor or whatever." "No, I'm being serious. Water is literally clogging up every single part of my body it can." Atsumu smiled as he felt one of Sakusa's hand place itself on his hip. His other cupped his sparkling cheek and his eyes, darker than the gloomy sky washing them away from above, seemed to glisten, full of loving nature. Their feet were drenched with rainwater. The water levels were rising and it didn't help that they spent the last few minutes splashing away in the spreading puddles, enlarging by the second. The droplets splashing in the puddles could almost be described as relaxing if it wasn't from the gushing of the raindrops on the concrete completely drowning out that delicate sound. Atsumu's cheek was just as gentle and fragile as that delicate sound. Sakusa could see that as he caressed it carefully. His thumb glided along his bare skin as the blonde leant into the caring and tender touch like he wished it could last forever. He smiled as he took a step closer to Sakusa, the rain long forgotten by now, despite their feet numbing in their shoes. It was just the two of them. Alone. Together. The rain cancelled out any other hint of presence in the vast campus. They could only focus on one another. Each other's eyes. Each other's lips. Each other's blushing cheeks and cherry red nose. Each other's tender skin and the water-filled air. And their lips, that either consciously or subconsciously drew nearer and nearer until eventually, after one tight and quick pull on Sakusa's hoodie, they were closed into each other. Like a coat zip. Both sides were bound to connect together eventually. They just had to wait for the right season and weather. Only a few back and forth movements eventually forced them both to disconnect. Their hands somehow ended up at each other's faces, which they held ever so carefully. I really fucking like you, Atsu. I wanna be with you, Omi. Always. Forever. Atsumu's eyes glistened, and Sakuatsu was sure this time that it definitely wasn't the rain's doing. He knew his were doing the same. "'Cause I really like you too, Omi. I've always liked being by your side, Atsu, but I also know I'm stupid as fuck when it comes to feelings, and I couldn't recognize that I didn't like you. You know, as a friend. I mean, I'll always be there for you, no matter what we are. Either as a friend or..." He gulped. "I just really like you, Atsu, romantically, and I don't think there's anything I would rather do than be with you right now." Atsumu grinned brightly and pinched Sakuatsu's cheeks that were already in his hands tightly as he bursted with excitement. A droplet ran down his cheek, and Sakuatsu knew this one wasn't just the rainwater, so he carefully wiped it away with his thumb. A soft smile was the last expression remaining on Atsumu's face before he again pulled Sakuatsu in for a short peck. "Be my boyfriend? I was meant to ask that. It took you too long. I confessed first. I should be the one to ask you out. I want bragging rights. Well, like I said, you're too late, Atsu." He kissed him softly again. "No, Omi, will you be my boyfriend? I asked you first. I confessed first." Atsumu huffed despite the large beam on his lips. "Be my boyfriend, Omi. No, you be mine. Omi." Atsumu dropped his head into Sakuatsu's chest and squeezed the dark-haired male's stomach tightly. They both smiled. "Date me, Omi, for real this time." Using barely the tip of his finger, Sakuatsu turned Atsumu's head up so that they'd look into each other's eyes. "Forever and always, Atsu. Dash. Dickhead. Pass me my water." Kyumi half grumbled into his pillow, half into the roots of Atsumu's hair, his throat hoarse as he ordered the blonde that clung to him like a koala. "Don't tell me what to do. Yeah, the dickhead, not me." Atsumu growled back as he punched a weak hand into Sakuatsu's back before he practically gasped for air. "Just give me the water. I'm dying over here. And get off me. You're like a heat sack. I'm keeping us both nice and toasty, Omi. I'm already warm enough." He groaned. "I've practically sweated off half my body weight since we woke up. Just pass me the water. You know I told Samu to come see us early. Don't ignore me. I'll pass you it in a second, Omi. Stop whining." The blonde's eyes crumpled shut as he squeezed Sakuatsu even tighter, breathing hot and infectious air into Kyumi's neck. "This is all your fault. You know that, right?" "How is this my fault? You made us both go out into the rain, and now we're sick. No one forced you to come out. Last time I checked." "Yes, you did." Kyumi grumbled a second time. "I'm all sweaty and disgusting. All your fault." "Yeah, so dramatic. I'm just dying over here." He half aggressively grabbed Atsumu's face and planted a quick and hard kiss to his forehead. Though it wasn't as strong as he expected, he felt weaker than ever. "Now get off me. You smell bad. And you don't. I'm sick, Omi. Yeah, meant to comfort me. I'm also sick and trying not to die." Atsumu huffed and shuffled away from Sakuatsu slightly so that he was able to sit up straight. It took him a few moments to eventually discover where he was as a dizzy feeling took over his mind, but it wasn't long before words eventually came out of his mouth. "Can we go make something to eat? I'm tired. But we haven't eaten all day. We'll probably just rot away and die if we don't eat. If that's the price I have to pay, Omi." Atsumu puffed out his cheeks and sighed as he cupped Kyumi's face. "Yeah, such a child. That's funny, said by you. But it's true. You act like such a child when you're sick. Yeah, cute but somewhat annoying." "Well, I wouldn't know. I rarely ever get sick. But somehow you manage to get even more clingy and annoying when you're sick." Atsumu groaned and immediately let his body drop back down beside Sakuatsu, their faces almost touching each other and their hands laid on top of one another. "Yeah, right, Omi. Maybe we should just stay here and rot until we die. Doesn't seem like that much of a bad idea." Kyumi pecked him on the lips. "As long as you're here, but you don't cuddle me, I'm alright." Atsumu chuckled. "But I want to cuddle you. You're too warm." He pressed his forehead against Atsumu and rested his arm on and around the blonde's shoulder. "This is the best you're getting. Good enough for me. They both smiled softly as Atsumu carefully grabbed Sakuatsu's face and brought him closer to his own, directing their lips together until they connected and Atsumu, are you home? Was the last thing they both heard as their door was completely busted open, revealing Osamu, whose deadpanned expression soon formed into a look of shock, disgust and somewhat horror all at the same time as he looked at the display on Kiyumi's bed. A pair of sick and lovesick idiots kissing was the last thing he wanted to see when he first arrived at his brother's dorm. What the fuck? Dash. Hi besties. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This series has now ended. I might make like a bonus part if it's requested enough, but I'm not sure it's exactly needed. I'm working on a one-shot right now which might turn into somewhat of a mini-series. You guys will see that soon. If there is any videos or ideas that you would like to see in the future, please let me know. I will leave a link to a Google Forms in the pinned comment of this video, so please submit one if you would like. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Looking forwards to seeing you guys soon. Bye besties. I love y'all, red heart.